TV presents Reimagine That with Chris Mann, offering refreshing reality with a retro twist. This week, part 3 of Chris's interview with Farrah Fawcett's secret longtime lover, Greg Lott. Plus, Chris talks with one of the stars of the TV Land series Retired at 35, actor Johnathan McClain, and we'll explore more Texas-sized dreams with our very own dream weaver, Yvonne Reba. And now, introducing your host, Chris Mann.
Thank you very much, Linda Kay, our vintage-voiced announcer and producer, or as Chrissy Snow would say, as they say in Italy, merci beaucoup. And hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to episode 13 of Reimagine That, the behind-the-scenes retroality.tv podcast, where retro pop meets forward thought. Who knew that was an intersection? But indeed it is, and this is where those two streets meet. We have a different kind of show for you today, a double feature. It is June 25th, and this is the 3-year anniversary of the sad loss of two great American icons, Michael Jackson and Farrah Fawcett. And on today's show, we bring you the third of 3 parts of our exclusive interview with a guy who knew Farrah perhaps better, and certainly like no one else did, Greg Lott, her college sweetheart and friend spanning 44 years and secret lover for the last several years of her life. He talks about Ryan O'Neill's new book, The Both of Us, about his life with Farrah, and Redmond O'Neill and Farrah's legacy, and so on. So stay tuned for that. It's been 35 years, so hard to believe, since Farrah abruptly left Charlie's Angels after 1 season. There are many reasons given why she left, but the bottom line is she went on to reinvent herself many times. And so it's only fitting that we sort of salute that aspect of Farrah. Many of us are age 35 and over. I'm 40. I grew up with Charlie's Angels and Three's Company and the like, and certainly in my 30s, and certainly right around age 35, I began to reimagine my reality and reinvent my career and my life. And we are soon going to be starting a new segment here on Reimagine That, a reality reimagined sort of real people segment with interviews with fans and everyday people who have been in some way inspired or influenced by pop culture, but who have their own stories of reinvention, again, where retro pop meets forward thought. So it'll be an interesting mix as we proceed. And I thought what a great way to sort of launch that spin-off concept with our featured celebrity guest this week, an actor named Johnathan McClain. You know him as the star of the TV Land sitcom Retired at 35, which returns tomorrow, June 26th, for a sophomore season on TV Land, along with Hot in Cleveland. Retired at 35 premiered about a year ago and really helped reinvent the sitcom by going back to its roots as a filmed in front of a studio audience type of entertainment, with the audience interacting and laughing and not that sort of canned feeling. There are genuine laughs in this show, and there's an audience there watching. So we haven't had that a lot until recently. TV Land's helping bring that back, and Johnathan is a funny guy. He is a trained stage actor who has also done film and TV, and recently sort of re-envisioned his own career and life in Hollywood. So stick around for his interview. That will be coming up next. And first, before we go to that, I want to give a quick shout out to a friend of mine who is an author, a TV author and freelance writer, and he recently started his own blog called Comfort TV. Check it out at comforttv.blogspot.com. David Hofstede is his name, and he's authored several books about television, including he co-authored with Jack Condon the Charlie's Angels casebook. Jack Condon is quite famous. He is in the Guinness Book of World Records for having the largest Charlie's Angels collection. It's phenomenal. Check out Jack's site at charliesangelsfan.com. David co-authored that book with him, and David has also written behind-the-scenes books about the Dukes of Hazzard and many other pop culture TV titles that are fun and interesting and go behind the scenes and on camera, the whole bit. And his blog really is a salute to TV from the past that comforted our minds and our souls. And he just began the blog recently. He has a fantastic post up about interviewing a couple of the stars of Dukes of Hazzard, Tom Wopat and the late Denver Pyle. It's really quite a charming essay that David has written. David is bringing his expertise online now as a TV writer. The whole TV books genre has evolved in recent years with the boom of the internet and social media and blogging. So it's very cool to see a TV historian like David join the ranks and really bring some smarts to the online blogosphere. So check out his website. Reading David's post titled Riding Shotgun with Tom Wopat took me back to that era of Friday night television on CBS, the Dukes of Hazzard followed by Dallas. Those were the days, from the crazy Dukes to the scheming, duplicitous Ewings, who of course are back on TV, scheming and being duplicitous once again, and how things come full circle 35 years is so interesting. But it's refreshing to see a fictional family scheming and lying and doing all sorts of bad things rather than seeing that on reality TV with supposed real people doing that. If I wanted to see that kind of backbiting and infighting and one-upping in real life, I'd go to a family reunion. Thank you. But thanks to a long line of classic sitcoms, dysfunctional families can also be, thank God, funny. And keeping that tradition alive is a sitcom that's back this week, June 26th, for its sophomore season, its second season of Laughs on TV Land, using the traditional multi-camera, filmed live before a studio audience format. Retired at 35, and we are so excited to have here as our guest today the star of that series, actor Johnathan McClain. He plays the put-upon son of Hollywood legends and sitcom stalwarts, George Segal from Just Shoot Me fame and Jessica Walter from Arrested Development fame. She also played Mary Cartwright's mother on Three's a Crowd. I have to get that in. Johnathan talks about the new season of this crazy ensemble sitcom. Marissa Jaret Winokur plays his sister. This season is a little bit more of an ensemble, but the essence of this show follows his character coming back at age 35. Hence the title, Retired at 35. His character leaves the corporate world and decides to reevaluate, reimagine, if you will, his life at 35, heading into that midlife crisis. He decides to leave it all and retire, quote unquote, with his folks at a Florida retirement community. Wacky sitcom hijinks ensue. And Johnathan has some similar situations. He sort of re-evaluated and re-envisioned his own life as an actor. He'll tell you all about that in this interview coming up. He transitioned in his 30s to a life in Hollywood. He did a short-lived sitcom. He'll talk all about that, including his experiences on the Paramount lot when he realized he was shooting on the same stage as Happy Days. Oh my God. So without further ado, let me introduce the funny Johnathan McClain, who also has some new videos up at funnyorDie.com. He'll talk all about that in his new season of Retired at 35 on TV Land. Hi there, Johnathan.
Hey, Chris. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. What's going on?
Oh, well, we are thrilled to have you here as a guest on Reimagine That. I want to ask you shortly about your hilarious Funny or Die videos and also your background as a performer. You have a multifaceted background. But first, your TV Land sitcom, Retired at 35, returns for its sophomore season this month. What kind of hijinks can we expect this time between you and your TV folks, George Segal and Jessica Walter? Those Hollywood vets.
The Hollywood veteran hijinks? Yeah, wacky hijinks, Chris.
Wacky
kind. Actually, I'm reasonably excited about the second season of the show, not least of which being, by the way, I'm in the middle of a rainstorm in New York, so I'm in a car, so if it starts pounding and interrupting the signal in any way, you let me know if you can hear me okay.
Okay, perfect.
The excitement that I have is not least of all in the fact that in addition to George and she hired Marissa Jaret Winokur, who won a Tony for Hairspray back in 2003 to play my sister.
Yes.
And so the answer to your question is that the show has really evolved to more of a true ensemble show.
Yes.
As opposed to the first season, which was very much on message. Retired at 35 was very much the theme, and it was about a guy sort of trying to figure out what he was doing and being stuck between his two crazy parents.
Yes.
And with the addition of the sister character and Marissa, it's a true family comedy ensemble.
Great.
So yeah, it's actually pretty awesome because now we can go into a bunch of different directions with stories. So you've got this fundamental story of the kid who is now a grown man but gives up his life and sort of has to live as a kid again with his parents.
Right.
With the addition of a sister, united in the second season. So it's a really, fully functional family. And so you can make kids sort of the adult children the parents from time to time because George and Jessica go off on flights of fancy in the second season and become, like children themselves. They reinvestigate their lives now that they're a little bit older and they can do whatever they want. And so,
great.
Yeah, it is kind of great. You get the possibility of like the children looking at their parents and going, all right, now you guys behave yourselves because we expect more of you. And I think that's reasonably relatable as a concept. And it's also
yes.
Because it gives
You're cutting out there, Jonathan. Can you say that again?
I was just saying it gives George and Jessica a chance to do really wacky, fun, goofy, sophomoric stuff. And
for a sophomore season, huh? Perfect.
For sophomore season, exactly. Thank you. Well done, sir. And when you see two established veterans who aren't afraid to make themselves look stupid, it's cool.
That's great.
It's really fun.
Well, you have that already established dynamic with the two of them, and now Marissa's coming in to play your sister. We saw your sister, another actress, like just in the pilot, and then she went away. I'm like, is she like Chuck Cunningham, but the character's back?
Yeah, Casey Wilson, she formerly of Saturday Night Live and currently of Happy Endings was in the pilot. But, in a pilot, you don't give everybody a full-blown contract because you never know if the show's going to go forward or not, if it's become a series.
Right.
And I think Casey was really busy, and so they just offered her that, and she came on to do the pilot. And then by the time we found out that we were going to become a series, she had contractually gone and gotten herself obligated to Happy Endings, which is awesome for her, and I'm super happy for her.
Oh, cool.
But, it put us in a situation where it was like, well, what do we do? And I think we felt like recasting right away in the first season.
Yeah.
You don't want to do the Aunt Viv from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air where it's like suddenly it's a different lady. Right. Where did the old lady go? So by not sort of having the character but referencing her throughout the course of several episodes in the first season, we tried to keep the idea buoyant, but not tie the character to an actress, and this gives Marissa a chance to come in with a clean slate.
So the character ended up being a little bit more like Jenny Piccolo than Chuck Cunningham. We heard a lot about her. Now we get to see her. It's all happy days,
That is a tremendous Herculean callback you just made. That is well done.
Well,
good job.
I want to ask you another thing real quick about Happy Days.
Yeah.
You have done a couple of sitcoms. You did the ABC pilot with Jessica Simpson a few years back.
I did. I did do that.
First of all, how did you survive that? Secondly, you did Jenny McCarthy's UPN show Bad Girls Guide.
And I survived that too.
You survived. You are a survivor. You did that on the old Happy Days stage at Paramount. Is that right?
Yeah.
And
I totally did.
That's absolutely true. Did you find your inner Chachi?
I found my inner leather.
Your inner
leather. I let it take care of. That's really who I discovered lives inside of me. I was surprised as everyone, but that's who she's inside of me there somewhere. that was awesome, man. I mean, like, these shows, whatever, you do the best you can.
Yeah.
That Girl's Guide was sort of no happy days, but there was something to be said for being on that. That's the Paramount lot, and it's one of the older lots in Hollywood.
Yes.
And it feels really magical, and we can Oscar awards from The Godfather and stuff when we're in the commissary. And it's really cool, just objectively speaking. And then, know that I'm in a dressing room that was occupied by one of those people, Lott or Henry Winkler or whatever. Oh, Lord, I don't know if you can do that. The cops are coming to get me. When you know that that's something that you're a part of, because as a kid growing up, I'm going to be 42 in a month, and so Happy Days was entirely my childhood.
Yeah.
And it really, I'm a huge television addict, and so, it was pretty great, and it felt like, it's a little bit like, damn it, I made it. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
And then you get canceled, and you're like, oh, I haven't made anything yet, but that's okay. I'll try again next time.
You're there.
And you're in the game. P.S., by the way, I will say this, because I have to say this about the Jessica Simpson project, because I have nothing but love for having done that pilot, because it was my first pilot, and I had never even considered the possibility of doing television. I was just a New York theater actor, and I was content doing that.
Yeah.
And it came along, and I was told, it's the Jessica Simpson thing. And I had, at that time in particular, this was 2004, Newlyweds, or whatever that show she had with Nick, was it Newlyweds or whatever it was called? Was on.
The reality show?
Right, the reality show, exactly. And so I had my opinions about her just like everybody else, and I was like, oh, who God knows. I have nothing but love for Jessica Simpson. As it turns out, she is an endlessly charming and kind of awesome person.
Wow.
And I gotta say, I recently saw that pilot again.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's corny, whatever, it's a sitcom pilot, it is what it is. But I was like, it's not terrible.
Yeah.
Like, it's totally solid.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wonder who at ABC shot it down, and I wonder if they would reconsider putting it back on the air, because, I'm sure that at some point, retired at 35 will end, and I'll need to go back to something, and why not circle back around and end where I started.
Wouldn't that be interesting? Life takes those interesting turns, and yours seemed to take one as you approached 35. Being a stage actor in New York, you had done a lot of dramatic, episodic TV, but didn't you pretty much move to LA in your mid-30s? Did you have a bit of an experience like your TV character of reevaluating your life at that point?
Wow. Kudos to you that you, A, did your research, and B, that's an incredibly thoughtful and right-on question.
Thank you.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I'm super grateful for everything that's happened in the handful of years that I've been in Los Angeles. There's been ups and downs, but at the end of it all, most people don't get to go off and have a television career in their mid-30s. Usually that ship has sailed.
Yes.
So I'm really grateful for that, and it certainly was. I mean, the first 3 years I was in LA, relative to your question about starting over, the first 3 years I lived there, I kept a P.O. box and wouldn't give my actual mailing address because I refused to give up my apartment in New York. I was absolutely convinced that it was just a flyover, that I was just stopping into LA for a while.
Yeah.
And I still feel that way on some level. I mean, at some point, it would be nice to return back to New York full time and just do theater. But as you get older, life becomes more responsibility laden.
Yes.
And one of the ways that, you need to take care of your responsibilities is you've got to make a living, and you've got to try and look after the people that are your family and that kind of thing. For me, and I've been fortunate enough, I've been lucky enough to make a go of it, doing what I really enjoy doing, and actually getting paid, a working wage to make that happen.
That's great.
It's something that I'm really grateful for. It's awesome, and it's so easy. I was definitely the guy that I'm about to describe. You see a lot of theater writers come out from New York with a big chip on their shoulder, and I definitely had that. I was snobby about it. But turns out there's lots of really smart, capable people who care about what they're doing in Los Angeles. And,
yes.
If you get a chance to do something that reaches a real audience, then, that's the whole point. As opposed to reaching 500 people in a theater a night, you're reaching however many millions of people who tune in to see the show. And that's not inconsequential, and I think that it was, interestingly enough, a real maturing process for me coming up to Los Angeles and recognizing that I'm not too good for this, because there's definitely that, like, I'm a serious actor, I'm too good for this.
Right, I'm an actor.
An actor. And I think that working with George and Jessica in the way that I described earlier is really helpful in that regard. These are serious actors, important, thoughtful, established people who are not afraid to make themselves look silly.
That's right.
For the sake of getting the job done. And it's pretty great. It's pretty great.
Well, it's so true. And now you have another stage vet with Marissa coming in, and we're curious to see how the four of you bounce off each other. You're also doing something really funny on Funny or Die. You're doing some political satires. It seems like you're incorporating a little bit of your background in slam poetry into a couple of these. And I heard an 8 is enough reference at one point, so you had me.
Well done. I'm glad you got that.
And I'm falling and I can't get up. What inspired that, and what's that forum like for you creatively?
You know, doing short films is something that's just a lot of fun to do. And my friend Adam Stein, who is in the shorts with me, somebody that I've known for like 20 years. He was an actor for a long time. He was a graduate acting program at NYU and did Williamstown and Broadway and all that stuff. And then he became a writer, and he wrote for Damages, and he's a really, really good writer. And he and I were having lunch, and he put down a little short sketch he'd written about Rick Santorum having made some comment about contraception is evil or something like that. And he conceived this piece about these two guys who were, you know, like political hacks whose job it is to get out in front of any screw-ups that a candidate makes and help them right their ship. And he wrote this funny thing about Santorum. And in about 36 hours, we made a couple phone calls and threw it together and sent it over to the guys at Funny or Die just because it seemed something to do on a whim.
Yep.
And they were really responsive, and they put it on the main page, and and it got a fair amount of positive reaction. And so
That's
we thought,
great.
let's just keep doing it, because for no other reason, it gives you something to do. It's fun to hang out and play with your friends.
Yes.
And so what we've started doing is roping in our other friends to come play. Like we just did one with Michael Emerson that just went up yesterday.
From Lost.
And currently person of interest.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing, right? Like, you know, you give Michael Emerson a call, and he'll come and hang out for the evening, and you get to make jokes about politics. I mean, that's, you know.
That's great. It's like hanging out with friends.
Good way to spend a Tuesday night. And doing something productive. And, you know, our feeling that we don't have necessarily a particular sort of political agenda. We're talking about the absurdity of politics. I mean, it is anything where someone wins and someone loses is a game.
It is a
right?
game.
So our take on it isn't to necessarily kind of any political party or any candidate. It's just to actually make a commentary on the process and how totally disingenuous it is unto itself. And, you know, that takes it, and it also stretches our imaginations a little beyond just making poop jokes or whatever, because you see a lot of that on Funny or Die, and I think that's too, but we were like, let's see if satire can fly. And some people like it, some people hate it, but we had a good time doing it.
You can tell. You know, I have one more question for you, if you have a moment here.
Sure.
You have such an interesting career, like I said, going back to the theater and now television and now online with these shorts. A 1996 review in the Chicago Reader on your one-man show, Like It Is, referred to you as a courageous artist, uncorrupted by Hollywood or network TV. And that, and that, quote, American theater needs him the way constipated old men need high colonics. 16 years later, after you've realized, you know, you got to pay the bills and you've had this career take off in TV, and you grew up loving sitcoms and being inspired that way, what do you make of that sort of dichotomy of he was the stage actor and now he's corrupted by Hollywood? Do you think, you know, there's space for both of these things in an actor's life?
Excellent question. Actually, that review is probably archived on the internet in 96. I actually think it was from like the original. I mean, I did that show about 20 years ago.
Oh, you did? Oh, my gosh. You must have been like 20.
I was like 22, yeah. And so the first caveat I'll offer is the reason that show was successful is because I didn't know that it shouldn't have been. Like, I was too stupid and young to know that what I was doing was a total, you know, like shot in the dark and risking failure at a very high level. So your question is one that I wrestle with all the time. I mean, you know, I thought candidly, you know, when I came out to LA, like, oh, I'll go get on something like The West Wing, or I'll be on something like The Wire or whatever. You know, and I'll make really important contributions to art and culture and make commentary, and I'll just take this thing that I do in the theater and bring it to a larger, wider audience. And I still want to do that. I mean, I still think that stuff is out there, and that's certainly my goal would be to make things that I think are beautiful and important and say things. But that sounds horribly pretentious, because at the end of the day, whether or not we hold a mirror up to society or whatever it is that we're doing as artists, we're people who get paid, actors are people who get paid to put on other people's clothes and pretend to be someone else who they are for a little while.
Right.
And so at its basest level, it's a childish endeavor, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I just mean like it's like a kid at play.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's room for all of it. I love going to see a production of Shakespeare done beautifully by the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I also really, really love Family Guy.
Yeah.
You know? And those things aren't mutually exclusive. And Facts of Life, Happy Days, Different Strokes, these are the shows that I really grew up loving. And so it's not about serving. I guess my answer is that obviously I want to do things that feel fulfilling or feel gratifying to me, but it's not about serving myself. I can service myself in my bedroom. That's not what I mean. What I mean to say is, that there's a reason that after the rehearsal, there's a performance. Because it's not about being closed in a room with other actors just doing the same thing over and over again. It's about sharing it with an audience.
Yes.
And so rather than think about I'm fulfilling my destiny or serving the artistic needs of my soul, I try to think about whatever audience, whatever I'm doing does have. I try and consider them and think, forget the people who aren't into what I'm doing. The people who are into what I'm doing are getting something from it. They like it. They're happy. It satisfies them. It distracts them. It moves them. And I was at the gym the other day, and some guy came over to me. I thought he was asking me how long I was going to be on a piece of equipment. And he said, I just want to tell you, my son and I watch your show, and we love it. We think it's so funny. And I was just like, that's great. I mean, it happens occasionally, but when I haven't gotten to the point yet where I'm just, quote unquote, used to it. And I think that I'm just so moved by the fact that I'm able to actually distract people or make them happy or make them feel anything.
Absolutely.
So I think the answer to your question in the simplest form is it's all performance and it's all entertainment.
Yes.
And I just serve it, and it's like if I'm a bartender, I'm not going to tell the customer what they should drink. I'm just going to serve them what they ask for.
Amen. When you said that, you reminded me of John Ritter, who, of course, it took him years to sort of live down in the critic's eyes Three's Company, even though he ultimately won an Emmy for it. But he went off and did Sling Blade and Shakespeare. But he told me once, it doesn't matter what you do, be going up to get the Nobel Prize for microbiology, and they'll start playing the Three's Company theme.
Absolutely right. And it is high praise for you to compare anything I said to John Ritter. So
well, I appreciate again so much your time here, and I love that you have an appreciation for the fine sitcoms of the 70s and 80s, and we are looking forward to you playing around with your TV folks and Marissa, and come on our show again down the road. We would appreciate that, Johnathan.
I would love it. Thanks so much for taking the time.
On a far more serious note, today marks the 3-year anniversary, June 25th, 2009. It's hard to believe it's been 3 years since we lost not only Michael Jackson, but also Farrah Fawcett. Farrah Fawcett, of course, waged a valiant 2.5-year battle against cancer that ultimately she did not win, but she certainly gave it her all. Recently, Ryan O'Neal, her longtime on-again, off-again, perhaps on-again love, wrote a tell-all book of sorts called The Both of Us about his life with Farrah. And in this third of 3 parts of our exclusive interview, Greg Lott, the guy who was Farrah's first love, her first adult love, her college sweetheart, rekindled his relationship with her in the last decade or 11 or so years of her life. Greg continues to set the record straight about what he knows and what he feels to be the true relationship between Farrah and Ryan, particularly in the last decade of Farrah's life, when he was very much back involved with Farrah. He also opens up about Farrah's role mothering Redmond O'Neal, and that was a very major struggle for Farrah, as Greg will tell us. Redmond, of course, has had a long documented history with drug abuse. Very sad. And apparently this goes back to his early teenage years, according to Greg and according to public record. Of course, Redmond is not Ryan O'Neal's only child to battle drugs, famously. Ryan's son Griffin and daughter Tatum, both with actress Joanna Moore being their mother, have famously battled drugs and have continued to do so in recent history. So Redmond, unfortunately, followed in their footsteps, much to Farrah's Farrah's deep sadness and frustration, and against her wishes and efforts. Greg also shares more about his relationship with Farrah and his feelings about Farrah's true legacy as a woman and as a businesswoman.
I mean, if she'll go after a drug dealer with a box cutter, you can imagine what she'd do about this kind of stuff.
And that's an interesting statement you just made about going after a drug dealer. Wasn't there a story, like in the National Enquirer, that she had gone after a guy that was selling Redmond drugs?
Oh, yeah, she called me one night, and she had Redmond in tow, and they were on their way to a drug dealer's house that had called her on her phone looking for Redmond, and it pissed her off. So she got Redmond and made him tell her what the address was, and she took her box cutter that she always carried with her in her car, and she went over to this guy's house in Venice.
Wow.
And banged on the door, got in the house, took his keys and his ID, and called the police.
Wow.
And the police came and told her, you can't do this as a vigilante justice and all that. But she wanted her son to see that she was standing up for him, and that she wanted this guy to know how serious she was about him intruding on hers and her son's life. And I tried to get her not to do this, but, you can't do things like that. She was a lioness, and she's protecting her cub. And anyway, the guy moved, never contacted her son again.
Wow. I think because Redmond has been in the news many times, his run-ins with the law and such in the last 3 years, people may not know what kind of a mother Farrah was, and now we've got Ryan's book that may not paint the most accurate picture of what kind of mother she was. Can you take us back to the position she was in when she split from Ryan O'Neill in 96, 97 relative to Redmond, and what access and control she had over his teenage years?
Well, she had her sister come out to California to look after Redmond because she had to go make a film called A Man of the House in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. I think this was in 97. And she got this hysterical phone call from her sister one day, and Diane, her sister, had gone to pick Redmond up at school. He wasn't there. So she didn't know what to do. Farrah tries calling the beach to Ryan's house, and he won't answer the phone. So what had happened was Ryan had gone and picked Redmond up and taken him to the beach and told him terrible lies about his mother, that she didn't care anything about him. All she cared about was money and her career and blah, blah, blah. Well, I think Redmond was 12, and in California, you can decide which parents you want to live with. And, of course, they had joint custody, and they'd never been married. So he chose to live at the beach, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And to tell you the truth, for the most part, except when he would be so ill he'd have to go to the hospital or to treatment, he stayed with his father until his mother died.
Oh, my gosh.
So she didn't raise this boy from 12 on. She didn't have anything to do with his addiction or anything else, because her rules of her house, so there weren't any drugs there.
But she tried to get, and did get him into treatment, even like in Mexico, right?
Oh, yeah, that's the first treatment program, and there were some mistakes made in that because Redmond was seeing a therapist that had been recommended to Farrah by her doctor. And the guy turned out to be a headhunter, which means he was recommending to families that they go to certain treatment facilities. Well, we didn't know that Casa by the Sea down in Mexico was not a 12-step program. It was a conduct behavior program. And so he spent about 18 months out of the 22 that were allotted without, having the drug issue. They did not address it. And so even though he learned how to make his bed and do chores and all that kind of stuff, which is great, and also he speaks fluent Spanish, his drug issue wasn't addressed. And so finally there was a time for the family week, where the family comes and the counselors and the child address the parents and their role in the addiction. And Ryan shows up in a brand new PT Cruiser that he wants to give to Redmond. Well, Redmond was 14 and didn't have a driver's license.
Wow.
And I tried to get Farrah not to go down there in Ryan's control. And she said, no, it'll be all right. Well, it wasn't all right. And she was all harried in a hurry to go and all that. Well, she ends up with no money and no identification with her.
In Mexico.
In Mexico. So she didn't even realize this until what happened. And they give Redmond a 24-hour pass, and he goes back to the motel with his parents. And Ryan announces they're leaving the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And Farrah says, well, I'm not going. So we need to contact the facility. We need to talk to the counselors and let them know and all this kind of stuff. He said, well, I'm not doing that. We're leaving. So the next morning, Farrah stood her ground, and they go out and get ready to leave. She realizes she didn't have her purse. She didn't have any identification and no money.
Mm-hmm.
So Redmond comes back in, gives her $50, and they left her in Mexico.
$50?
She's 40 or 50 miles from the border. So the facility sent a van, and they took her up to Tijuana. She crossed the border on foot, took a cab to the train station in San Diego, and took the train. She called me from the train station, and she took a train home to Los Angeles and took a cab to her house.
Oh, wow.
And Ryan wanted to show her the control that he had over this child and who was the boss. And that's what he continued to do for the rest of her life. And she had to play the game of brinksmanship, where she would give him his photo op, which included chasing Farrah, the segment there, or photo ops at the gym, or he'd show up with paparazzi in the basement of the UCLA Medical Center. And, that was a game that was played, and so she would have to do things that she wouldn't ordinarily do to have access to her son, who was a total heroin addict by this time.
Oh, my God.
Even Griffin couldn't control him.
Greg, one question that pops into my mind is, why didn't Farrah just stop and take Redmond and move back to Texas, and you guys could have had a more normal existence for this kid?
I worked for a hospital called Charter Hospital, and it had facilities all over the country. And I worked for them for a long time, and one of the doctors that was considered to be the primary physician in adolescent drug treatment had taken over when Charter finally sold out. He had taken over their facility in Provo, Utah, and I contacted him, and I think Redmond was 14 at this time, and he was willing to take him for a 2-year period. And it was the only lockdown facility. In other words, he couldn't leave. He'd have to stay there and go through their program, and couldn't go out and get drugs, or nobody could bring drugs into the facility. There weren't any other facilities like that, certainly not in California.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I felt like, I still do, that was our big opportunity to change this child. And in California, you have to have both parents sign a waiver saying that they can leave the state of California, whether it go back to Texas or to this treatment facility. And of course, Ryan wouldn't sign it.
Wow.
He really doesn't want this kid to get clean and sober, because he wants him to be under his control. And that's the name of the game. So when that opportunity passed, it was... Anyway, now he's been to, this is his 15th program that he's in right now.
Presently in 2012.
Right.
Oh, my gosh.
So that's the game that Farrah had to play with Ryan, and that was this so-called love story that they've continued on for 30 years.
According to Ryan.
The last 14 or whatever it is, I guess the last 13 years you'd say, were because he had this child.
And she didn't want to leave California and move back to
He wasn't going to leave this child in this predicament, because he's near death all the time. That's what a person who puts a needle in their arm is.
Ryan says in his book, where he calls Griffin and Tatum to task for their drug addictions, which he seems to blame on their biological mother, Joanna Moore, who apparently was an addict, and claiming that they were sort of hardwired, I guess, from her genetics. But he says that he isn't or hasn't been an addict, yet he was arrested in 2008 for possession along with Redmond. What do you make of that claim?
Well, he's a convicted felon, and we have a saying in AA, addict or an alcoholic, if their lips are moving, they're lying. So that's the way I look at Ryan O'Neal on a daily basis.
And what, to your knowledge, did Farrah think of the influence Griffin and Tatum had on Redmond when he was young? Because I'm assuming before he was a teenager, if those two adult children were in the house, Farrah was very aware of what was going on and what they were bringing into the house, or not?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's another story. It's in the National Enquirer where Redmond Redmond is just so furious at his mother because, and I don't know if she did this back when she had 3130 Antello, but this is what she did at the condo. If he brought friends to her house, she searched them and their bag that they brought with them before they were allowed in her house.
Wow.
She had an entryway that was off of the elevator, and she searched everybody. She just didn't allow drugs into her house. Now,
Wow.
I think when she was still the head of her household on Antello, and if those kids were teenagers, they came to visit, she pretty much controlled, her own house. And Redmond was small, and so I don't think she worried about it. But as far as the bad influence, that was, the straw that broke the camel's back, of course, was finding Ryan down at the beach with a girl, the 25-year-old. But up until that time, it was all about him doing drugs in front of this child over and over and over and over again. Since she had live-in servants, she pretty much had eyes and ears of what was going on while she was gone.
Now, you weren't in touch with Farrah during the 80s when she was really with Ryan uninterrupted. You got back in touch with Farrah in the mid-90s. She filled you in on some of this.
Oh, yeah, she told me everything. I mean, we started seeing each other again in 1998, and we kind of caught up with each other's lives during those next 11 years. So I don't know where he comes off saying that they got back together, whether it was in 2000 or 2004 with the Chasing Farrah thing, but I was with her, and he wasn't there.
It's interesting because we don't have the opportunity to read Farrah's book, because even though people wanted her to write a book, Judith Regan offered her millions, she didn't do it. But now we have Ryan's account where he portrays really them just being apart for a few years, her coming back to him when he was diagnosed with leukemia around 2001. Then we would see these moments of them together in Chasing Farrah or Farrah's story. But really in the 2000s, you're saying that she just was trying to appease him, and they would just have these sort of photo moments together for the camera,
that's
for
what
Ryan?
he needed, because that's his whole life. He's on stage, and he has to be associated with her, so he'll have some kind of fame. And I just am saying that this book is a fabrication, because I've got love letters all during this time. I've got phone records talking to her every day. And if somebody were to go to the Wilshire condo, they would see that my name is logged in when I come to visit. Where is he? Because he's not logged in to come to visit. The only time he comes to that condo is to drop that kid off when he is so sick that he either has to go to detox, a hospital, and then to treat every single time. That's the only time he shows up.
In Ryan's book, is there any other particular incident or attribute that he describes of Farrah that you have particular issue with?
Well, this whole description of her as being angry and depressed and menopausal and all this other stuff is just another way for him to put her down, because that's not the way I found her in 1998. And I think that there are a lot of women who are as athletic as Farrah don't go through menopause until much later in life. And as far as I'm concerned, she wasn't in menopause, and she was very sexual. So to say that she became bored with him or whatever, it's just another way that he always does, where he blames his own shortcomings on his children, on her, or whatever. But he always takes credit for whatever her
successes. Saying he coached her for even the Apostle?
Yeah, but he wasn't there, because if you look again at the time frame, that's after 1997, and he's gone. And he's not around for the last Playboy shoot either, All of Me. That's not true either. He's gone.
He's out of the picture at that point. Because it was like at the end of 96 when they split, even though it wasn't technically announced until maybe early 97 in People magazine. But that's your understanding, that at the end of 96, that relationship was over as far as a love story.
Another thing, Chris, is that the whole Letterman fiasco, that was the week that Farrah was notified that her child was missing. Okay?
Wow.
She had final cut on the All of Me video. She had to go to New York to do the Letterman and the Howard Stern, and she'd never done either one, and she didn't know how she was going to be received. She had been working night and day, 24/7 on the editing of this film. It meant a lot to her because it was an art project, not just the nudity that David Letterman would like to portray it as to be.
Mm-hmm.
And once she got to New York, I mean, it was total chaos. There were 3,000 people outside the theater. There were all kinds of shenanigans going on inside. They edited all of that out, so you don't see that David lost complete control of the audience. People are falling down, tripping over cables, and she's distracted.
Wow.
And she's also sick. You know, she's run down, and that's why...
They don't know what she was going through.
Well, see, there's stories that are starting to be planted in the Globe for the next 2-3 years.
That she was on drugs?
That she was on drugs, and, of course, her association with the O'Neills. So that's just not true. I mean, Farrah wouldn't do drugs with me in the 70s. Why at 50 would she all of a sudden start doing drugs?
Right.
I don't think so. She didn't even drink. You know, if somebody handed her a drink, she'd have a sip and put it down and never see it again.
So, if anything, your feeling is that, or your knowledge is that she was just under tremendous stress, what was going on with her kid, what was going on with this project and the deadlines of it, and then she was put in this live TV crazy situation where she just resorted to sort of a dumb blonde routine, right?
Right, because she didn't know David, and she realized that he was going to be ugly to her about the nudity in this magazine, and she just went into this dumb blonde that she used to play against on the Tonight Show with
Johnny Carson.
Johnny Carson, and he'd play back, and they had a fun time because he knew how to handle comedy. So, and also, Farrah told me, because she stayed in New York trying to get some kind of spin on this, she found out that there was a guy who was a reviewer of film and television and stuff like that, movies, that wrote an article that was just an attack on her based on what his wife had told him, her idea of what Farrah looked like and was acting like. And he wrote this salacious review, and he never saw it.
Oh,
well, that went out all across the country, and that really started the bad press that Farrah had never had before. And
I remember that vividly.
And then finally, after I had developed this really good rapport with Griffin, he told me that he had been planting those stories with his dad and getting paid for them about her
in the Globe.
Drug addiction. In the Globe.
And that Ryan was involved? Griffin told you that?
Absolutely.
Oh, my God. Wow. You know, Farrah seems sometimes to be an enigma because she could go into the light, fluffy, dumb blonde thing, but yet we know that she was very shrewd as a businesswoman. She didn't write her own book. She didn't ever marry Ryan O'Neal, and yet he had control over her affairs at the end. If you could tell people in a few words or sentences, who was Farrah Fawcett at her core as a person and as a businesswoman?
Well, she was a microbiology major when I met her in college. I mean, that ought to tell you something about her.
No dumb blonde.
And then once she got to California, I mean, she probably had a few times where she was taken advantage of, but I promise you, by the time she had those 3 or 4 contracts with Fabergé and Ultra Bright and what have you, that she knew what the game was, and she knew how to get paid. And, I mean, when you think about it, who at that time would be able to figure out how to get the rights to the poster after a year would revert back to her copyright?
That's amazing.
And she did that with both Playboy editions. All those pictures are owned by the Farrah Fawcett estate.
Which, ironically, is now run by Ryan O'Neal's business manager, who Farrah didn't trust.
Yeah, and by the way, all of the licensing now for her image, a la Elvis, goes into the foundation in perpetuity.
Wow. It's very complicated, this whole thing with her estate and her legacy.
You know, she might have had it so that her licensing of her image would go into a foundation, but believe me, it would be controlled by her son, not by Bernie Francis and his family.
And so now we have, was it a $6 million estate? $6 million man, $6 million woman.
Well, Ryan said it was 25, didn't he?
Was that a joke? I mean, these are big discrepancies, and it'll be interesting to see if a lawsuit, an investigation by the California State Attorney General, if it will bridge the gap between these accounts and these numbers.
Well, you've seen that signature that's on that document, right?
It's been online.
And you know what Farrah Fawcett's signature looked like. What do you think, Chris?
Well, to talk about a discrepancy, I mean, that woman had some serious penmanship. I've seen autographs that she's dated 2006, 7, 8, 9. And that woman, when she wrote a letter, it was letter perfect with her F's and
Absolutely. And personalized.
And then all of a sudden we have a living trust that's not an initialed page by page, is it? That document?
No, it's 53 pages in front of a signature, by the way, where the date is different from the notary and from Farrah. Farrah didn't date it, and she dated everything that was an official document.
Wow.
Okay?
We've seen online, and European media has covered your story, that you were definitely in touch with Farrah and had an intimate relationship in her final years. I don't know why the U.S. media hasn't jumped on your story. I mean, what's your take? What's your experience with them giving you feedback?
I had a real close relationship with Mike Pingle, who was Farrah's assistant. And Mike is an angel to me. He's the seventh angel, as a matter of fact. And he carried Farrah, absolutely carried her to UCLA between when she was diagnosed in September the 22nd of 2006 until her birthday of the next year. Not Alana, not Mela, not Ryan, nobody else but Mike Pingle. And I trust Mike like there's just no tomorrow. So I called Mike after Easter during that week, and we got together, and I said, I have got to get some media involved in this because I can't get access to her, and her dad's too sick to participate in what's going on. And this was the week after Easter was on Sunday. So Mike gave me a bunch of contacts with Mike's publicist, and I contacted, 10 different media outlets. And every single one of these people were rude to me. They wanted to know what was my story, what did I want from this, da-da-da-da-da. And I would come to find out that 90% of them would call Alana first before they would get back to me, and then they would get back to me with this, we understand from Miss Hamilton Stewart, that you're just a disgruntled boyfriend from 1965 who's out here to cash in on Farrah's death.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So a publicist for Ryan O'Neal and Alana Stewart had gone around before I ever got there and poisoned the well with these people because I guess they were smart enough to know I was coming.
Were you ever featured in an E! True Hollywood Story or anything like that has been done?
I did an E! True Hollywood Story in August after Farrah died, and they threw me onto the cutting room floor because the producer told me after I did 2 hours with her that they couldn't use me because Ryan O'Neal and Alana Stewart and Ella Murphy would refuse to participate in the piece.
Whoa.
I flew all the way to San Antonio, Texas to do that.
I've had some experience through Three's Company and my Three's Company book and A&E biographies and E! True Hollywood Stories on John Ritter and Suzanne Summers to know that people who have access and control over images and video and the like can determine the biography of a celebrity or the participation of people in those projects. And now, because so many iconic images of Farrah, her image, in essence, is controlled by the estate, which is controlled by Bernie Francis. Ryan O'Neal and people can determine if those images can be used in an hour or 2 hour show. And so therefore they can determine who is part of the journalistic account of Farrah's life. These are things people don't understand.
Well, they've sold this love story, and of course the media's jumped on it because it sells. It's Farrah Fawcett, and it's a love story of some 30 years, which is a lie. And he sold it before I got there. And he's pre-sold all this other stuff. And what's interesting now, though, is that he went around, and you saw him on these TV shows, portraying this book to be this love story, and it is anything but. And that's why I've come to refute him, because I'm not going to let him get away with throwing her in the gutter. That's where he belongs.
Well, he's now, from what I hear, has either stage 2 or stage 4 prostate cancer. There have been some discrepancies there. Do you think Ryan is getting to a point where he's maybe becoming reflective and starting to see things from other people's point of view and maybe gaining some compassion?
You got to be kidding, right?
Well, I don't know him. I mean, it didn't seem that way on The View or other media he's done recently. What do you make of who he is as a person?
My dad died from prostate cancer, and I was with him that whole last year that he fought through that. And I know what the stages are, and I know what's going to happen in the next 5 or 6 months. And we're going to see, what Ryan O'Neal's made out of.
Yeah.
Because this is something he's not going to be able to just manipulate or whatever. This is now, he has to sit down with God and decide what's what.
It's certainly quite a saga with what he's going through and what Farrah went through, and you have this amazing story. Are we going to get to read your book one day? I just read recently that Alana Stewart has another book coming out
isn't it?
about her own life.
She's just going to keep on capitalizing on Farrah's name. It's just, I just can't believe who would want to read anything about her. Her first book, I don't think it did so hot, but
My Journey with Farrah.
I'm going to write the real love story that was between Farrah and me.
Mm-hmm.
And I predict that people will want to know the truth.
I always think that people need to take everything into account. We've seen Alana's book. We've seen now Ryan's. There are other people in Farrah's life who were important and close that maybe haven't been featured in the media that bring other components in. And you certainly bring a huge component in a relationship that spans 44 years. Do you have an estimated idea of when we'll be able to finally hear your story with Farrah?
I've written the first, 5 chapters. I've written the middle, and I've written the ending. And I just have to sit down with a writer, and we have to get it published. And that's the hardest part, because I've just had an almost impossible. I've done several interviews on television. I've done interviews with OK Magazine, and I just can't get any traction. So I've got the story, and I've written most of it. I just need, a publisher to have the cojones to saddle up and let's get this thing out, And then I'm going to go out in the public, and people can ask me questions. Mm-hmm. I'll be around.
Well, you've answered all of mine.
In the meantime, I'm saying that the both of us is a crock of shit.
Ryan's book. One other thing I wanted to ask you, Greg, about Farrah, because there are times when she does seem enigmatic, a woman who was so in control of so many parts of her career and her personal life, not marrying Ryan. She had so many strengths. Is there a weakness or a flaw that Farrah had in human nature? Did she trust the wrong people?
Well, I think that Farrah was, she was a lot like my dad. She had an adventurous spirit, and she wanted to take people on first glance, Mm-hmm. And then if you proved that you were not capable, then she was gone and never looked back.
Mm-hmm.
But I think she was very giving, and she was naive in a certain extent. And I think that she fell in love a couple of times, and they didn't work out. And that happens to a lot of women in Hollywood. And
sure.
I think it's more the nature of the men there than her weakness.
Right.
Because I'm a pretty strong man, and she loved me, and she never looked back on these other guys,
Mm-hmm.
You take this child out of the equation, and it's just like Lee Majors. She never saw Lee again for 25 years, didn't talk to him. She would have never had anything to do with Ryan O'Neal again if he didn't have her son.
That is a very interesting point.
And another thing is, except for the 16 years that I chose, because she had a child in 1985 when I got out of the penitentiary, we were always together except when I made these 2 mistakes in my life.
In the early 70s and the early 80s.
1972 and 1982. Just go back and look at your chronologically and look at when she got married and look at when she started up with Ryan O'Neal.
Very interesting.
It's a map.
It is. Is there anything else, Greg, that you want people to know about you, about Farrah, about the truth of Farrah and Ryan? We've covered so much here. Is there anything else you want to say in closing?
No, not really. I just know that the truth will always come out, and God's got a plan, and I just have to be patient, and things are going to work out. And these people that have chosen to ride her fame and her legacy are just total fakes.
Well, the truth does find a way of coming to the surface, and with lawsuits and investigations, those things seem to propel the truth upward eventually. So we will be watching and waiting to read your story, Greg. I appreciate your time here.
Thanks, Chris.
As we remember one of our favorite heavenly Texas girls this week, let us also check in with our own resident Texas gal who deals in ethereal matters. That is Yvonne Reba, our dream analyst. Check out her website at YvonneReba.com, YvonneRyba.com. And this week, Yvonne finishes up her saga, her own Texas-style saga about moving to America in the early Dallas-rich 1980s from Britain and pursuing her own version of the American dream, as it were, which was not so much of a materialistic dream as it was a spiritual dream in pursuing spiritual matters and eventually leading her on her pathway to becoming a dream interpreter and a practitioner of science of mind. So let us check back in with Yvonne and find out a couple of other dreams that she had as she was moving to America and in her first couple of years here. And in retrospect, what meaning does she find in these dreams? What did they tell her then, and what do they tell her now? You had another dream relative to this Texas saga for yourself?
Yes, I did, yes. Now, this one was like about a year later. I've got down here January 1982. Mm-hmm. But the other one was December 1980, so it's really just a year and a month, really, over. And by this time, we had an attorney in Austin, as a matter of fact, who was working on our green cards. And we were waiting for him to get this thing going, and we sent him the money, we were waiting, oh my goodness, it just seemed to go on forever. Mm-hmm. And we had a house up for sale. I mean, we had to start doing things because once we got a green card, we had to move. We couldn't hang around and wait because they only lasted a certain amount of time. And things were slightly different in the 80s than they are now. You could come over here with, like if you were going to hire people and so on, which you still can do, but you could come over here and be sponsored and so on. Mm-hmm. Anyway, this is the dream. Here we are, by the way, preparing or looking forward to getting into the U.S. And we did that later that year, right? Mm-hmm. So I am in Concert, which is the town I was born in. It was governed by the steelworks. It originally was an ironworks and then became the steelworks. And I was in Woolworths in Concert in the dream. Mm-hmm. Now, Woolworths was the largest store in Concert.
Mm-hmm. We had them in the United States, for sure.
Absolutely. And we all knew that it was an American, if we called it then, like the U.S. Mm-hmm. We knew it was from there, and it was our kind of link with this country. Now, I can't say... I mean, there aren't any Woolworths now, are there? I think they've gone. They might be the odd one.
They all phased out, and it's funny when you mention that. Farrah Fawcett played Barbara Hutton in a TV movie. She was the Woolworth heiress, wasn't she?
Yes, she was.
Yeah, so that was a time, certainly in the 70s and early 80s, that I remember before probably Walmart took over in the United States. But yeah, Woolworth was a biggie.
So anyway, it's funny because I have been back to Woolworths in dreams since then. Mm-hmm. But it's always the Woolworths in Concert, right, which of course is no longer there.
Oh, funny.
So I went into Woolworths and walked about authoritatively without a basket, touching things. The displays were very futuristic and with many colors to them, and they appeared to be made out of plastic. I unhooked one set of whatever it was, and an assistant said to me, "Oh, it's ties you want." And they appeared to be hangers for clothes. Yes, I know, that particular phrase, we wouldn't look at that.
Yeah.
So these are hangers for clothes, and they were in sets of 6 or 12, and each hanger was shaped differently in a different color for a different garment. So they all seemed to be made for a specific garment, very specialized, right? Mm-hmm. I started to collect different sets and told her we were going abroad and needed a lot to pack our things away. Now, we were nowhere near packing, 12 months almost at this point before we moved. But my mind was way ahead of me. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that these gadgets were specially made for people who were emigrating. Well, isn't that interesting? Uh-huh. So my husband was called Temperley, but we call him Temp for short. Temp was in the store too, and he went past at a distance, piled high with things. I could see him in the distance, adding more and more stuff to it. And that was how he did things, by the way. He used to have tons of stuff. I got to the checkout with my load and thought, well, this is too much to carry, and I need to bring the car around to the outside. And it went on longer and longer, this dream, and some of this was not to do with going to the U.S., but with things that were going on in my life. So I'm going to leave it at that point with that one. So that part of the dream, of course, was all to do with the preparation and anticipation of emigrating. And it's a huge deal when you bring your whole house with you.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people we found later on just sold everything up and came over here and bought over here. But we had a lot of stuff that we couldn't do that with. I mean, we had my husband's artist studio and all his paintings and all the stuff that he used in his work. You know, if he was doing a ceiling, he would have rolling scaffolding. Now, he had no clue where to get that. When we got over here, we found that this is sometimes difficult to get what he had got in England. He had some very sort of stuff that was almost antique, you know, and wasn't used there anymore. And that's where the plastic comes in, by the way, I think. But I recognized that everything over here was more of a temporary nature. It was beautiful and colorful and specialized, but you didn't have to hang on to it for very long, although plastic can last forever. But you know what I mean? It was that kind of an attitude.
Disposable culture.
That's right, disposable, not the big old heavy hangers that are made out of wood, you know. The plastic ones that are much lighter in sets of dozens and half a dozen. And the part where it's ties you want. Well, yes, exactly. I wanted to be near my sister.
Family ties.
Yes, my family ties. And she wanted me to be near her. And we had all got to a place in our lives where her children had been born and they were just in their early, you know, their toddler stage and so on. And so I would be here to sort of see them growing up. And also, we were the only ones in our family. I mean, we had parents at that point, and we came back and visited. But life was, for us, it was for my husband and I, it was very restrictive. England was going through a bad patch. The IRA were very active in Ireland and also in England. I mean, they blew up a bus of soldiers going back to camp with their families.
Oh, wow.
And so on. Yeah, I mean, just near to us, and things like that. And Mrs. Thatcher was nearly killed later on, years later, but that's another story. You know, she was in the conservative kind of convention.
Right.
She was in a hotel, and they put a bomb beside the wall. It was just by good luck she'd walked from that room to another where she wasn't blown up. But some of her aides were killed.
That is real drama. I mean,
yeah.
I can see why you would want to get to the U.S. where the bombs that go off were just on TV, you know?
That's right. This is many years before we had anything like that, and we still don't have it.
Thank God.
Believe me, we do not have it. We do not have every day in this country on the news people being blown up. And that's how it was. It was very depressing.
Yeah.
And I was really very much sort of ready to be reinvented
Yes.
in this country, which the other dream referred to.
That's right.
Now, a little bit later on, this is another little part of a dream that I'm going to squeeze in here, Chris. About 6 months later, I had this dream, and it's part of a longer dream. I dreamt that 2 large cardboard boxes arrived from our American attorney. I had difficulty opening them. They were well stuck down with lots and lots of tape. But I did manage, and I found packing on the inside. I didn't delve into them, but waited for Temp to come home. They had been on the way a long time, and I told my husband this on the phone, and I said it must have cost a fortune to send them. Now, the weird thing was, when I got up that day after I had that dream, I went downstairs, and in the dream, the packages had been, to begin with, an envelope on the floor, which had converted themselves into 2 large cardboard boxes.
Okay.
I went down to get the mail. There was a card on the floor. We had letterboxes, remember. Push our mail through the boxes. And you get it on your door. There was a card from our attorney, and it's been 17 days getting here.
Wow.
Which, you know, it's long even to get to England. 17 days usually takes about a week. So this was kind of like telling me something was on the way, but of course the boxes were my husband and myself as well.
Okay.
Getting packed up, right? And having a hard time getting there as well. Taking a long time to do it, which was true. You know, we were waiting and waiting and waiting. It's always the way, you've got to wait.
So objects, animals, things that you dream about can often actually represent you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can be a cardboard box.
In America, you can be anything. So this dream happened in like 82 or so after you settled in the United States, in Texas?
No, that was before we came.
Oh, okay.
After we got here, I had lots of dreams. And, of course, then I'd have weird dreams about being back in England and not being able to get here. Like it's sort of an anxiety dream. That I was going to have to go back again or something. That's so funny.
That's really cool. So you kept these detailed journals, and so you can go back into the late 70s, throughout the 80s, to see as you reinvented yourself from British teacher to United States, Texas spiritualist, and all the things you've done in the last 30 years. Yeah. And you can see the added meaning in these dreams that maybe you didn't have, that time has given you in retrospect.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, I have got lots of journals, and thank goodness I did put the date on them, because you don't think you need to, Until like 30 years later, you're looking back. I mean, I looked at one. The first one in this book is 1979. Now, I wouldn't remember it was 1979 if I hadn't written the date on it.
Right. It's just great that you documented it. Yeah. It really gives such rich context to your story, and that's what you would probably recommend for people to just keep journals and date it?
Absolutely. Date it. Give it a name if you can. That helps you when you're looking for it again. I had a dream that I just found in this book while we were talking. And it was a month after we got to this country, right? And it was about my husband. And he was sitting on a sofa, and there was a hole in this sofa. And I looked at it, and I thought I saw a leg, a kind of white leg waving around. I thought, oh, my God, it's a spider.
Yeah.
But it was too big for a spider. I thought, well, that can't be a spider. And then it kind of poked its head out a bit more, and I realized it was a very large crab, all right, like an Alaskan king crab.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, we found them in this country. I mean, we came over here and had these great big crabs that you can get and so on, and it was just wonderful. Our crabs back in England come from the North Sea, and they're totally different. Very nice, great, but the Alaskan king crab was really different. Now, when this crab came out, I was scared to death, and yet my husband wasn't. And then the scene kind of fuzzed over, clouded over, and then the next part of the dream showed Temp offering me some cooked crab.
Oh.
Okay, and he said it was silly to worry about stuff, and he'd cooked it and made use of it. Now, the interesting thing here is, I was a Scorpio, he was a Cancer.
I was thinking in terms of astrology, if there was a significance there.
That's right. And I identified with that and him, because he did fit the bill, the home-loving, sort of crusty on the outside, soft on the inside, because that's what that's like. He could be frightening, but, he was delicious at the same time. We ate this crab. It was good. And so he is saying, don't be frightened of something. You can make something out of everything in the dream, right? So, and I saw him as reinventing himself, you see?
And he did, as an artist in the U.S. So you guys moved to Texas in 1982, is that right?
Yes, the end of 82. And we lived in Houston for almost 8 years. And then we went to California, and we lived in L.A.
Wow.
And we'd worked in L.A. before we moved there. That's why we moved there, because we're getting a lot of work there, and Beverly Hills and so on. And we were in houses of the rich, famous, and film stars and all that kind of thing, and it was amazing.
Ooh, I'll have to ask you more about that.
Yes, those are other stories altogether.
Yeah.
But, my husband had worked in palaces and castles and things in England, and he'd also done palaces in Saudi Arabia.
That is amazing.
Yeah, he was an expert in what he did. He really was.
So he had he dealt with color and vividness. Yes. And so when you mentioned the vivid dream where you and he went into the Woolworths with all the colors and do vivid dreams have a certain significance, being that they're so palpable? You think of the year of Dallas that was all a dream, but we sometimes dream in very detailed storylines. What do those types of dreams have a special significance?
Well, the more vivid and clear and intense a dream is, the more important it is. Really, it's your higher self, your subconscious, whatever you want to call it, is saying, I'm giving you this to make sure you remember it. I want you to see how intense it is, how clear it is. so that you will remember it when you wake up. It means something.
Technicolor. It's like when
That's right.
Judy Garland ended up in Oz. She went from black and white to Technicolor.
Absolutely.
And so that is something to take note of when you have a dream that's in Technicolor. Pay attention.
Right. Or if the feeling in the dream is very intense, and you wake up and you think, what the heck, that was really something. I've got to figure that one out.
And speaking of Dorothy, you eventually lived in Kansas, right? See, there are all these connections, Yvonne, to pop culture. We'll have to ask you about Kansas.
I lived in Kansas, and I enjoyed that too. I've lived all over. I lived in Utah. Yeah, I've lived wherever.
Well, I've got a pop culture tie-in, Hollywood tie-in, Wizard of Oz. We've got to talk about all these different geographical down the road. Well, thanks for sharing some of your Coming to America, Texas dreams. It's
Thank you.
Interesting to see how it all played out, the precognition and the symbolism. It's interesting to see how your dreams, eventually you lived them.
That's true, yes. And you find, when you look back on them, like now I'm looking back and seeing things I didn't see in the dream. You know, I'm thinking, wow.
In retrospect.
That actually came true. Oh, you know, I didn't realize how significant that little thing was in the dream. So, yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing this, Yvonne. And next time we talk, maybe we'll talk about some of your lifestyles of the rich and famous dreams.
Okay. Well, I got those too. You're right. By the way, I watched the first episode too of Dallas, and it was fun. I enjoyed it very much.
It was fun. You know, it's like you can go home again. I wondered if they would be able to pull it off. But
yes. It looks like they're going to be able to.
They're going to do it.
Intrigue and subterfuge and deception, yes, it's all there.
All that. The Stinger, the Scorpion, and JR is alive and well.
Yeah, he's still the watchable JR, isn't he? Gosh,
isn't he?
Yeah, I love it.
It's a part of American lore, and it's cool that was a little bit of a part of your transition to the States. So we'll have to revisit that theme, too.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Reimagine That with Chris Mann was brought to you by Retroality TV. Copyright 2012 by Chris Mann. You can find us at retroality.tv and at reimaginethat.libsyn.com. Tweet us at retroalitytv or join us on Facebook at facebook.com/retroalitytv. And don't forget to check out our TV channel at youtube.com/retroalitytv. And keep in mind that one should never stop striving to improve oneself. I, for one, decided to try channeling my inner Chachi and or Pinky Tuscadero, but somehow I only managed to channel my inner Catmandu. And man, is that one enigmatic, crazy chick.